ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the INSS English podcast, today dedicated to one of the most burning issues on the Israeli agenda, and also, as we speak, an inside look at the Arab community in Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, we record this program today while in the background, Israel is at the peak of a security tension with Gaza after the Israeli military launched Operation Shield and Arrow, a targeted operation against the Islamic Jihad terror organization in the Gaza Strip. On May 9th, the IDF targeted 3 senior Islamic Jihad commanders responsible for launching rockets towards Israel over the last month and planning further terror attacks against Israel. We are recording this program on the 3rd day of the operation, after more than 500 rockets were launched from Gaza towards Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, and after IDF jets bombed more than 100 targets of Islamic Jihad in Gaza. This operation, until now, brought also to injuries and casualties. In Israel, 25 Israelis have been injured, and in Gaza, 25 Palestinians have been killed, among them children, and 76 others have been injured. Until this hour, a ceasefire has not yet been in reach. In this program today, we also, of course, begin by discussing the effects of the current situation between Israel and Gaza on the Arab community in Israel, also in light of marking this month 2 years to Operation Guardian of the Walls, which marked a new, very alarming challenge in the Arab-Jewish relations. More in the program, the current, of course, tragic wave of acts of homicide among the Arab community in Israel. We discussed the reasons, the implications, and also possible ways to cope with this horrible wave of homicides. The Arab community in Israel, a view from within. We begin right after this. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to the INSS podcast, today dedicated to the Arab community in Israel, an inside look. My name is Adi Kantor, and joining me today in the program is Professor Mohammed Wattad, Associate Professor and Dean of Law at Zefat Academic College, and a senior researcher here at the INSS Tel Aviv. Mohammed is a legal scholar specializing, among many fields, in international and comparative criminal law, laws of war, torture, and terrorism. Welcome to the program, Mohammed. Thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you for having me here.
So, Mohammed, we have to begin, of course, our talk today with what is happening right now in Israel, what is happening in Gaza, Operation Shield and Arrow that has begun 2 days ago. We are today in the morning of the 3rd day. This brought already to casualties in Gaza, to injured Israeli civilians. How do you think this operation and the current tension, security tension between Israel and the Gaza Strip, how does it affect the Israeli Arab community in mixed cities? We have to say, we are recording this program on May 11th, 2023. This is 2 years to Guardian of the Walls, to the Operation Guardian of the Walls. We witnessed two years ago horrible sights, horrible situation, horrible relations between Jews and Arabs, and the way they reacted to what was happening in Gaza. We are now again in a security situation. What is your take on what is happening right now? What do you think? How will it affect Israeli Arabs?
Thank you, Adi, for this question. Actually, not only that we cannot ignore what is going on, but rather we must pay attention to what's going on. We must pay attention first and foremost because state security is of the utmost concern for all citizens alike, Arabs and Jews. No one is willing to be at war. No one is willing to see casualties. No one is willing to see people being dead and their property being damaged. We would love to think of ourselves living in peace, but it doesn't look like the situation. But besides that, and not less important compared to what you said, you mentioned the Guardian of Walls operation. It sounds like it was last year, but actually it was 2 years ago. And when that means a lot, it means that we still stuck in there. We still feel the consequences of the horrible events, of the tension, the violence between Arabs and Jews. And let's put aside now the question of symmetry who was more violent, Arabs or Jews. By the end of the day, we're all citizens of one state, the state of Israel, and we'd love to live together in peaceful atmosphere. And I'm mentioning that because the answer to your question is it basically depends how long this operation of nowadays is going to last. Depends how long the rockets from the Gaza Strip are going to last, falling on our heads in Israel. Depends when we decide both sides together through mediators or directly reach a ceasefire agreement. The more days pass with this armed conflict, the more intensified the tension is. And I'm saying that because we live in an area where the tension basically starts by the fact that Arabs and Jews live together, and we know that aside to this day-to-day living, there is a tension between the question of citizenship and the question of nationality. By the end of the day, I mean, the Arab citizens of the state of Israel are more empathetic towards the Arab population in the Gaza Strip, sometimes because they have a relationship with them, relatives, etc., etc. So the more we see casualties in the other side, in the Palestinian side, the more we see casualties in the Israeli side, especially Jews, but not only. Then the tension between Arabs and Jews in the streets, when they walk together, when they go to work, when they go, to schools, to hospitals, to malls, people start, hesitating whether to speak in Arabic or to speak in Hebrew, what terminology they should be using in referring to various events concerning the armed conflict at which we are engaged nowadays. And we're
I'm
not
just saying in relation to what you said, a rocket doesn't know to distinguish between if this is the Jewish victim right now or an Arab victim right
not
now.
at all.
It's pointing towards Israel. This means everybody's here. It can hit
Yes,
both, of course.
of course, of course, of course. And I mean, I would like to recall, I mean, for this in this context, the 2006 war, the second war in Lebanon. I mean, there were more casualties of the Arab citizens of the state of Israel rather than Jews. Not that, I mean,
Yeah.
that proves your argument that the rockets don't distinguish between Arabs and Jews, and we are not willing for these rockets to distinguish between Arabs and Jews. We'd like to have all Arabs and Jews, citizens of the state of Israel, safe from the rockets. We'd like to see also the Palestinian innocent people safe, from any injury. You'd like to see all of them living in peace. So what I'm saying is that we have to be not only paying attention, but we have to be very cautious these days. I feel very cautious when my wife goes to hospital. She's a physician. I mean, we talk about that. When my kids go to school, we talk about that. I mean, it's a special, very tensed situation, and we have to be very careful. And therefore, giving you the background of your question, the 2 years passing since the Guardian of Walls operation and the horrific image that we saw at that time, we're not willing to have this being repeated, seeing this image happening again. I mean, the ramifications for this from this event were very tough on us, and we still hold them in our minds and our hearts, and therefore we are in a kind of recovery process.
Yes.
Hopefully, this situation will end up as soon as possible in order to avoid all these hard ramifications of which I've been talking.
We hope so, definitely. Do you see any situation in which we will see again sites that we saw 2 years ago? It really depends if it escalates more, you say.
Of course, I mean, it's not about being optimistic or pessimistic. It's about being realistic. And, I can't just answer this question within the narrow context of the Guardian of Walls operation and this operation, but I have to see it also in the larger context of the recent results of the Knesset election and the new government and, the nationalistic facets of this government, taken together with the so-called legal reform, of which people have been going out to demonstrate against. All these together create the atmosphere and the ground that is required, quote to quote, for such escalation in the tense relationship between the Arabs and Jews, not only Arabs and Jews, but in particular Arabs and Jews, and that might take us directly all the way back to May 2021. It was Right.
2021, yes, May 2021. Mohammed, you mentioned now, and I was about to come to this, the judicial reform, the Israeli judicial reform. We now we go now more an inside look in the Arab community in Israel, and we have to see what happened, of course, in Israel in the past months. The judicial reform, the demonstrations all across Israel. What was the effect on Arabs in Israel with regards to this, to the reform, to the possible reform? We didn't see them demonstrating in the streets. How did it affect them? What do you think?
Well, to be fair and accurate about describing the reaction, I have to put it this way. They have denounced the legal reform, declaring that they are opposing the legal reform, but at the same time, they did not join in large numbers the demonstrations against the legal reform. Their argument has been that the Supreme Court has not been fair towards them in certain instances, leading among them, the decision concerning the constitutionality question of the nation state law. And therefore, why should we stand for the court right now? But I oppose this argument because, first of all, it's not accurate, and the Supreme Court has been seriously fair towards the Arab community. It is not utopia, because you can't expect the court to solve all the problems. Most of the problems ought to be solved by the government and by the parliament, not by court. By the end of the day, the court has a very limited power. But second, even if they were right about some of their arguments, this is not the right time when you talk about regime change, to make this a pros and cons discussion with the court. And because what is required here, what is mostly important here, is not the bottom line of any particular decision, but rather the self-independence of the judiciary. So I would support a judiciary which I know that it is independent, even if I disagree with all its decisions, rather than supporting a court that gives me all what I want, but I know that they are not independent. However, on the ground, if this legal reform passes and becomes a reality, the first group among all Israelis groups that is likely to be injured and the rights are likely to be violated is the Arab minority, not only because it's a minority, it is a national minority, it's a weakened group. And by the end of the day, the only reserve that they used to have, and they still have, in order to protect the rights, it has been the Supreme Court of Israel. I mean, they are an inherent minority, political minority in the Knesset. They cannot affect the government. I mean, we saw recently when Ram joined the government, we saw kind of effect, a good effect. Things could move one way or the other. But once they're out, and it has been a kind of unique. I hope it will be repeated in the future. But it looks like it happened once, and God knows if things will happen again in the future. But so far, this is the case. The only institution that is required for the protection of human rights in general, but in particular for the Arab minority, is the Supreme Court of Israel. And therefore, not only that this reform should concern the Arab minority in Israel, it has practical consequences on their daily life. If the Supreme Court decided that the nation-state law is constitutional subject to the fact that it ought to be interpreted as a declaration only, it doesn't provide the Jewish citizens extra rights compared to the Arabs. Here we see that if the legal reform passes, then the government or the parliament, depends how you see that, because the parliament is basically handicapped by
the government
compared to the government, and the government is hijacking the parliament. Then we see that the government and the parliament will override the court decision. And they will see that the nation-state law has a practical, operative anchors, and therefore it's not just about declaration, and Arabs ought to be second-class citizens, for instance. So yeah, I think that the Arabs should have been part of the demonstration. I have heard leading senior Arab members of the parliament saying that the demonstrations are going so well, and therefore we are kind of hesitant whether to join in order not to make or force you decide Jewish demonstrations from leaving these demonstrations. This is kind of, we do that. We omit from joining the demonstration in order for the demonstrations to continue. So it could be a kind of,
Meaning that the fear was that if Arabs will join the demonstration, this will make
some Jews.
Jewish demonstrators leave because they're Arabs. This was the fear. These were the voices that you heard.
We heard Mansour Abbas stated that, straightforward in the radio. He was one of the clear voices against the legal reform. He joined the demonstrations here and there, but he made it clear that, this is the understanding that if Arabs in massive numbers will be joining the demonstrations, it might give the demonstrations a kind of, this is an Arab-Israeli issue. It's even the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Add to that the fact that, the Palestinian flags might be raised there, and some Arabs might feel not comfortable with the Israeli flags. So, it might overmuddy the water.
Bring the numbers to decrease. It's interesting what you say, because I did hear also other voices that said this demonstration has actually nothing to do with us. You're not demonstrating. You, the Jews, are not demonstrating for us. You're not. We never interested you. You are actually demonstrating for your own freedom, for your equality, for your freedom, for your democratic values. But this had actually nothing to do with us. I mean, from identity point of view, they didn't feel part of this massive demonstration.
That would go to the lay people. This has been the argument for the lay people, definitely. But what I quoted and what I was referring to was about the politicians. I heard this argument, Mansour Abbas said in radio.
Yeah, interesting. The gap between what politicians are saying and what people are actually saying on the ground.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Lay people ought to be more authentic. Politicians make their.
I think probably it's a mixture. It's a mixture of people are worried, and Arabs were worried from different reasons. And I think these reasons must be heard also in the Jewish community to understand what are the fears and what are the worries. Mohammed, we are discussing many topics today in a very short program, unfortunately, but I think they are all interrelated, interconnected. We started by the current situation with Gaza and Israel. We then moved to the judicial reform and legal rights, and we turn now to another very interconnected, interlinked issue, a horrible issue, and I'm referring here to the homicide, to the acts of homicide among the Arab community. And here, just we are. I know there are many people listening to us and viewing us also, in other countries. Just a few tragic facts to think about for our viewers and listeners. In only 4 months since Netanyahu's sixth government was inaugurated, an unbelievable number of 73 acts of homicide occurred in the Arab community in Israel. We're talking about 73 innocent lives that were taken under the eye of the police in only 4 months, among them women, children, and babies. And this must be said. And also this week, just before the operation, the military operation began, the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, referred to this as an emergency situation in Israel, not less than that, an emergency situation that must be attended by the government, by law enforcement, politicians, members of Knesset need to take this as a case of emergency, not less than this. I think this is the first time actually that a president of Israel refers to this issue as, of course, an issue of national interest, and not less than that, as an emergency situation. We see a horrible peak in homicides. We see murders taking place actually every day. Babies, children, women, innocent men. What is happening? Maybe you can elaborate a bit about why did we see such a peak of 50% more in only 6 years when we compare 2014 to 2020, to 2020, 21, 22, and this year we really see an increase in cases. Why? What is happening?
I met with the president of the state of Israel a few months ago, together with some leading figures in the Arab society. And when I had my turn to speak up, I put this straightforward, saying that the situation in the Arab society in Israel concerning criminality and violence is nothing but an imminent threat to the national security of the state of Israel, and therefore we cannot cope with this situation with the regular tools with which we have been using in the recent years, but rather we have to refer to the emergency tools and deal with that as such as it is. And I was very happy that the president made this statement as clear as he was. But I hope that the people who are in charge of the situation of the law and enforcement will take his statement seriously to the extent that they do something in order to change our reality. Now, violence in the Arab society has been a phenomenon in the recent years, but aptly you have put this in this particular year, we saw a serious jump with the numbers of casualties of this criminality events, and
It's
the
really
reason
every day. Every day we wake up in the morning, we open the newspaper, another one murdered.
you wake up in the morning and you didn't hear new news in this regard, it is more likely that you didn't open your laptop or your mobile phone.
Yeah.
Obviously, something must happen. Now, there are reasons for that. It's not just by chance.
Right.
There are serious reasons for that. In the previous government, there was a 5 years plan, numbered 549, according to which it was a proposed a large comprehensive body of all the authorities concerning law and enforcement that were supposed to implement certain steps in order to create swift reaction to the phenomenon of violence in the Arab society, particularly against organized criminal groups. And there are about four organized criminal groups in the.
Which, according to what you say, this is the main threat, right? These 4 or 5 criminal organizations, this is what the main threat that the police is coping with.
Because they're involved even with our daily life. If you have any divorce conflict with your husband, then you will find them in there trying to settle up the issue and therefore gaining power from that and money as well.
Yes.
And since the new government, we have seen that the person who is supposed to be in charge in order to coordinate the work between all the authorities is not there. He was not appointed yet, so there's no person. This capacity is empty, and when you have black holes, of course you will have power. Who will get that power? The most powerful side. The most powerful side right now is the organized criminal groups. In addition, even within the various authorities of law and enforcement in Israel, concerning coping with the violence in the Arab society, people in charge have not presented yet any plans. So you don't have on the table any plan to discuss in the first place. Now,
and at the same time, babies and children are murdered.
Of course.
Just because someone doesn't have a plan, babies are paying with their lives because of this.
Of course, but the third reason as well is that the plan, the 5 years plan 549, and of course the 5 years plan 550, which dealt with improving the socioeconomical lifestyle of the Arab society in order to avoid certain reasons that create violence. These plans were drafted together jointly by state officials and representatives of the Arab society. Nowadays, not only that, we see that the minister of so-called national security in Israel is not really working, in harmony with his people in the police forces, but also he's in hostile relationship with the Arab leaders of the Arab society in Israel, and that all together leads us to one place. You have a vacuum, and when you have a vacuum, you have this criminal activities, you have criminal groups coming to cover this vacuum the way they know it, the way they can do it. Nowadays, there's no serious struggle, if at all, within the recent months against criminal groups in the Arab society. What we saw in the news concerning one group called the Abu Taif family, I'm sorry, which is one of the most horrific criminal groups. It has nothing to do with the current minister. It has to do with a plan that was emerged a year and a half before, when Segalovich was the deputy
Yes.
minister.
Deputy.
Minister
But it was
for
frozen. And since then you say there's vacuum and no one enters into this vacuum and the problem is not being coped with. And we discussed also in an earlier talk between you and me, you said also, we're talking also about, the police has no ways of coping with this. It has, because of a lack of resources, lack of money, lack of budgets. This has to be said, right? That the police must have more budgets, more resources to deal with this. But also, you mentioned in our talk the fact that the Arab community is a closed community by definition, and it's very hard for the police to enter. Can you say a few words about this?
Well, to start with, I mean, unfortunately, and I'm saying that sadly, the police power in Israel is a weak body.
Weak body, yeah.
Yeah, whatsoever. It's weak concerning the Arab community. It's weak concerning the Jewish community. Of course, it's weak when you compare it with criminal groups in Israel. It has to do with the lack of budget. It has to do with the lack of manpower. It has to do with the lack of trust from the people in general. Of course, from the Arab society in particular. It has to do as well with politicians who criticize the police forces again and again and again for political reasons, with no justifications in doing that. So by far, I mean, when you go to the police to submit a claim, first of all, your default situation would be that you suspect that something will occur out of that. But if
so
something
we discuss the symptom and the reason of the problem, I think what we are witnessing right now with regards to the murders, this is the symptom of a much, much deeper rooted problem, which, according to what you say, is distrust. People do not trust going to the police station because from the beginning on, they say they're not going to believe us.
That's true. But having said that, back in 2000, the state of Israel has enacted a special statute called the Statute of coping with the organized criminal activity, which has resulted in great, amazing, positive success among the Jewish criminal groups in Israel. This has been not yet the case concerning the Arab organized criminal groups. Abu Taif family is a good example how it worked. But it didn't work. First of all, I mean, I would like to think that the police forces have tried to implement their power in this regard in the Arab society as a default presumption. But it didn't work because there are certain peculiarities of the Arab society, particularly of the Arab criminal groups, organized criminal groups. When you go to the so-called Jewish criminal group, I mean, the heads might be relatives, but all the other soldiers or the other, it's like an army criminal group. So you have different ranks. There are people who belong to different groups of the society, different nationalities, different religions. There's nothing beyond the bound of criminal activity that bounds them together. When you come to an Arab criminal group, most of them, if not the entire members of the group are relatives. So it is really hard for the police to get inside them. It is really hard to have undercover agents working within them. No one is willing to really gossip on what is happening in this organized group, and therefore it's not easy. To add to that, and it might be just
in the final sentence, because we're right towards the end, but final sentence regarding this. Yeah.
Of course, just to elaborate on that, it is more likely that the police forces in Israel ought to be granted certain tools that usually are affiliated with the Secret Service in Israel. I'm not saying that the Secret Service in Israel should take take in and start operating this issue.
Yeah, then we are in a different situation. Yeah,
but there are certain tools that the Secret Service in Israel have. If you grant them to the police forces,
systems, you mean? Yeah,
of course, with the judicial review, it might give extra power that put them in a different level when they fight criminal groups.
Do you see this happening, by the way? Is this something that is on the way,
I
or...
think sooner or later it might happen because what I'm suggesting here is a proportionate model. It's not, the extreme. You take it or leave it. What I'm saying is
Yeah.
just take some tools. You have the right people who can, who are equipped, well equipped, and could be well authorized as well to use this tool. All you need is just to have judicial review side by side and to make sure that these things are done legally.
And I would add to this, all you need, of course, is will, the will to do something, and the interest to improve the situation that is indeed deadly. Mohammed, we have so many other issues to attend to with regards to the Arab community in Israel, and we will, of course, invest more programs in the INSS for this in the podcast. We discussed today about Operation Shield and Arrow, the judicial reform, and the situation of homicide killings in the Arab community. Next program, of course, we will attend to a lot more positive sides that must be also, of course, attended to and said with regards to positive trends, education, women. 80% of Arab academics are women. This has to be said. We will discuss this in the next program, and I think there's a lot to be promised for this. Thank you very, very much, Mohammed Wattad, Professor Mohammed Wattad, for enlightening us on very important issues on the agenda, on the Israeli agenda. Thank you, and thank you also to our listeners and viewers. See you in the next program.